The Halo franchise needs to be put to rest already, and the fans of the franchise need to move on to greener pastures. Good morning, gamers. I'm writing the script at 5 in the morning because Campaign Evolved has been pissing me off to the point where it's invading my dreams, so you get tired as all get out, Miguel. I've been a lifelong fan of the Halo franchise. I was there since the original Xbox came out, and in fact I have distinct memories of going over to my neighbor's house, picking up the Duke controller with my tiny little hands, and playing Halo 2 in the classic CRT. Yes, I'm old. Shut up. Now, here's the thing. If the issue here was just, ew, new shiny game bad, old crusty game better, and I were falling victim to nostalgia, that's one thing. I've been around long enough to where I can look back at the original Halos, recognize their flaws, and I even know that they're not perfect. But here's the thing. It's not an old is better thing. It's the fact that Halo Campaign Evolved is an insult to the art form of game development itself. Here's the thing about making video games. A video game, just like any collaborative project, is a delicious BLT sandwich that's made by several people at a time. You got the writers who are like the bread and serve as the foundation of the game. You've got the bacon in terms of the prime meat, which is the gameplay loop and how it handles in context of the hardware and potential limitations of the engine. You have the lettuce in terms of music, sound design, and voice acting, which provides essential nutrients to bring the sandwich together. Then you have the art design, that tart little punch that is the tomato, which brings a majority of the flavor, complements the bacon and the lettuce, and can also be turned into ketchup if you have baby mouth like me. Now, here's the deal. Making jokes at my neurodivergence aside, this is where I was going to make a joke about Campaign Evolved essentially being the case where the devs don't like tomatoes, so they just pulled out the tomato slice and ate the rest of the sandwich. It's not a full BLT, but maybe you replace the tomato with an avocado or a fried egg. It's not a BLT anymore, but it has enough elements of the original sandwich to pass, right? I don't mean this as shade to the devs, but Campaign Evolved is essentially the equivalent of trying to make a BLT out of the contents found at a pizza place. Sure, you have the dough, the meat, the tomato, and maybe some sort of vegetable, but it's put together in such a way that it's a weird, mushy lettuce dough that's just undercooked. Or maybe you want to compare it to a tasty curry versus overboiled chicken, which might be a better comparison. Whatever gets the most accurate mouthfeel of white people food. Reusing assets isn't super uncommon in stuff like game development and films. Between Resi 7 and 8, some minor assets were reused, such as set dressing items, kitchen models, and objects that are less essential. However, when it comes to essential things such as animations, character models, and primary assets for sets, proper iteration and improvement to keep in mind with the current generation is key. They call on the original concept art while updating certain things like poly count, learning issues from the previous textures, and finding ways to make the game run smoother, or in some cases, make it run less smooth. Campaign Evolved, on the other hand, is a hodgepodge of animation, models, and art styles expressed over 20 years, shoved into a game which was originally made 26 years ago. Covenant rigs are lifted directly from Halo Infinite, Flood rigs are pulled from Halo 2 Anniversary, animations are pulled directly from Halo 3, and all made over different generations by countless different people with different techniques, which creates this weird amalgam of stuff that just doesn't work. You cannot use a rig that is the byproduct of almost 30 years of artistic iteration and change and just expect it to serve as an acceptable substitute. I think if you wanted to create a faithful retelling of the game that brings players back to the era of the original game, new models based off of the original concept art, color palette, and original colors are better than just shoving whatever you can find to fit the role, though I suspect that this is all a time-saving measure. Now, I'm getting tired of writing this script, so I'm just gonna TLDR some of my other thoughts because, let's be real, you've already heard a lot of these opinions already, and I'm just regurgitating what countless internet people have already said. Number 1. I do not care for them re-recording Chief, Keyes, Johnson's, and Cortana's lines. I know a big part of it is because they wanted to introduce some rewrites and expand the universe and give Keyes an arc related to his daughter, but I feel like that was kind of unnecessary. The big reason I've seen for them recasting Keyes and Johnson are because Dave Scully and Pete Stacker are both retired. I'm not bothered by the fact that they've been recast because their new voice actors are doing their best. The problem is that, at least in terms of Keyes, an additional arc isn't really essential to connect him to Miranda in Halo 2. We already got the sense of Miranda's connection to her father through her own reactions in Halo 2 Anniversary, so at that point this is just doing unnecessary work. Keyes as a character is a proxy for humanity to help introduce us into the world and provide us a sympathetic perspective. His arc is indicative of the threat of the Flood and shows the fragility and weight of the situation. You don't need every character to have a deep character arc to make them a good person or intriguing. In fact, if you have too much of that going on in a game, you can actually end up oversaturating it. But with that aside, I don't care for the voice direction. I don't know who's directing the voice actors, but I don't think that the poor delivery is on the voice actors, but rather the directing staff. It's more or less the same issue as A Realm Reborn in Final Fantasy XIV, where you've got all the cool, experienced critical role voice actors, but because the director doesn't have the proper vision or potential experience, it leads to the delivery being flat or disjointed. I don't care if they have to recast or re-record stuff for the bonus campaign, because I recognize that new stuff will not have all the resources and the people of the time. However, I feel like the main campaign is cheaper without its original delivery and acting choices. Letter B. I don't like how changes to the gameplay are seen as a fix, because they impact the pacing, set dressing, and how the game feels. I don't care if the weapons sandbox is expanded. It makes sense that stuff like beam rifles, energy swords, and SMGs are there because they don't really impact the sandbox approach of the game. However, I do not care for sprinting because in order to compensate for the change in speed, the size of the rooms and maps therefore have to be adjusted in scale. I watched Hidden Xperia's playthrough of 343 Guilty Spark, and the rooms felt both simultaneously huge but weirdly squished. Halo's pacing was directly influenced by the lack of sprint and the consistent movement in exchange for being able to shoot on the go, so removing that ends up changing the experience overall. Halo was a direct transition from the boomer shooter era, aka Quake and Doom, and its gameplay was directly reflective of that era, and the original intent worked with the limitations is unfortunately lost. The soul of a game is directly impacted by the era and the limitations it was created with, especially when it comes to its engine, and when you apply modern techniques after 2 decades of iteration as something that was made at a specific time, that technique and impact is lost, and you end up with a cheaper experience. Numero 3, the new Flood sucks balls. On the note of that level, since the Flood AI was pulled from Halo 3, you have significantly less aggressive Flood, which is just kind of sad and doesn't really fit within the balancing. Films like the Mona Lisa showed just how terrifying the Flood can actually be in concept, and to see what's supposed to be the galaxy's greatest threat slowly shuffling forward and not taking up much space is just kind of sad. Now, the set dressing and goopiness of the reinterpretation is pretty cool. I do like how there's more biomass clinging to the walls the longer you go on. I'm not keen on the remapping of the level, but I get the feeling that they changed stuff around to justify the remake, which in itself is its own issue, but I digress. However, the original Flood had this disgusting green, bioluminescent plant vibe that's just been completely lost over the years. There's literally no point in having the green glowy stock things outside if the Flood isn't going to match what it's clearly supposed to be tied to. And I don't know if it's just whatever material they used or if it's because of the lack of texture detail, but the new Flood just looks bad, I'm sorry. I saw the infection forms in the game, and they just lack all the bumpy little bulbous, almost pimple-like textures on the front. The carrier forms don't do the silly little arm wiggles as they eagerly shuffle towards you either, so that's disappointing. I feel like I'm looking at some waxy model that isn't rendered correctly whenever I see these rigs. It looks like some weird low-poly goop that Moreau makes in Resident Evil 8, and it looks like something that was made 15 years ago rather than in 2026. But unfortunately, modern games tend to go in with the mentality of high enough poly equals enough detail for the models. Until we hit more recent generations, a majority of the texture in video games was provided directly by the texture map and bump maps. A lot of that information was implied because the devs had like 3 triangles to work with back in the day, and nowadays, since we have a lot more storage space and processing power, a lot of devs have started to rely on higher poly counts just to shortcut relying on materials and such. It leads to this very flat look that you could honestly convince me that the combat forms took some time to put makeup on to smooth their skin out. 4-piece chicken McNugget! I get that we have technology to have new sound design as well as the budget, but if we're gonna make a Frankenstein's monster of Halo as a franchise, can we at least pull the plasma rifle sounds from Halo 2? There was something that was just warm and unique about that sound that Halo hasn't felt in a while. A lot of Halo's original sounds were stock effects, and I'm not necessarily mad about us moving away from stock sounds, but I think something that's kind of been lost over the years is the made-in-the-garage soul that the original Halo had. Original Halo was made by a team of about 15 people rushing around the clock for a year, and a lot of its little quirks came about during that time. For a little context, a part of why I appreciate the silliness of that tiny team dynamic is because it reminds me a lot of my time in college. Like, as part of our senior film, as my animation degree, we basically had under 1 year for a team of 10 people, plus some change to make an entire film. And the thing is, we were kind of a kitchen sink crew. We were the B team. We had some great people, and then we had some people that we kind of had to carry in order to get to completion. Anyway, making any kind of ambitious project with a little team leads to some fun little quirks and bits of soul that you won't find elsewhere. When you're limited on time, you find solutions that seem crazy, but because you don't have the budget, you kind of work with what you got. Sound is a part of the soul of any kind of audiovisual medium, and when I heard that The Flood doesn't use the same sounds as before and the voice acting is different, it's just like, if you guys were going to put in all this work, why not just make something new? I know the answer is that Halo is taking perpetual losses and they're trying to keep it alive, and they desperately needed a remake to do well so they could continue existing, but maybe we just don't need to do this anymore? Mambo number 5. At the end of the day, myself and a lot of longtime fans of the Halo franchise are just tired of continuous franchise entries. Steve Downes is getting pretty old, and you can definitely hear it in his voice. The emotional end of Halo 3 and Reach have kind of been cheapened by poor decisions made by 343, and the franchise has just been going downhill ever since Halo 2 Anniversary. Because the crazy thing is that Halo 2 Anniversary was actually good. Outside of a few things that I feel like could have been a little bit better, it's a faithful adaptation that helped bring the campaign to modern hardware and expanded on the vision seen in the original game. I don't mind new adaptations when they honor the original artistic intent and manage to capture the original feeling. I keep looking at what was made with Halo 2 Anniversary, and then I look at what we have with Campaign Evolved, and it all ultimately comes down to people and budget. It just makes me look at the state of things after Infinite, and I have to ask why we're still doing this. I don't want to spend $50 on an inferior version of a campaign that I've already purchased twice, and it completely does away with the what's old is new, almost Alien-inspired aesthetic. All of the original devs have moved on to new, better pastures, and when you take away that essential core of a game, you essentially get stuck with this iterative game of creative telephone where you continue hollowing it out until it's nothing but an empty suit. And here's the thing, I've always lived by the principle of if you don't like it, just don't engage with it, and I'm not gonna buy Campaign Evolved. I don't want to pay $50 and financially support beating a dead horse, but Halo's also an important franchise to me and a lot of other people. Halo was there for me when I needed it, and it's low-key painful seeing something that was such a big part of my upbringing, creative voice, get spat on like this. What really grinds my gears is the fact that there's stuff in the remake that genuinely makes me curious and makes me want to play it. I like some of the shots and the lighting conditions of the new 343 Guilty Spark level. It's definitely a lot more moody than the original remake. The original models they made for the game all look good, even if I don't agree with some of the art direction choices for cutscenes. I mean, this is the first time we've seen a plasma rifle in proper HD in like 10 years. It's got just enough of the right stuff to get me interested, but it's also got enough wrong with it where I'm going to be mad if I pay for it. It's like eating gluten-free bread for the first time. Like, you know it's supposed to be bread, but there's just enough of it that's off that you don't want to finish your sandwich. It's the point where every time I see modern Halo entries, I just look at it as just like, at this point I might as well make my own Halo, and that's basically what I've been doing. I've been so unfulfilled by Halo that I've started learning game development just so I can make an FPS that scratches the necessary itch. I know a lot of people are going to say, if you don't like AAA games, just go indie, and I have. The game industry is kind of on fire right now, and there's always going to be poor practices, and at this rate the indie scene has basically been capturing a more accurate feeling to what earlier game dev brought to the table. But that doesn't mean I can't critique things that I don't enjoy. I can eat a gourmet BLT made lovingly by hand from the indie people while looking at the cardboard pizza explosion and tell people it's bad. Anyway, to all the devs who genuinely put their hearts and souls into Campaign Evolved, I am sorry. You're probably just about as passionate about Halo as I am, and you're really excited to work on a Halo game, and now I'm here shitting on it. I think if Halo's going to have any future, it probably needs to let Chief as a character rest and move on to side content like ODST, where we can actually focus on other characters and still enjoy the franchise without clinging to the big green man. And no, Halo 5 doesn't count. They absolutely botched that. I don't really care for us basically redoing the original trilogy and trying to say, oh, this is better because new graphics, hee hee. If we can't have something new that invokes the original feeling, then at least do something fresh that doesn't tarnish the original's reputation. I know the original games are still going to be there, but the fact that this one is also called Campaign Evolved is just going to mean that the abbreviation is even harder. Anyways, subscribe so I can earn like 2 cents on each video. Fuck. Okay, bye!